What's going on? My name's Dillon. Welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to be continuing on with the MetaTrader 5 series so that by the end of the video you'll be able to take an indicator and code it within your very own expert advisor or trading robot, which will eventually of course be able to trade the markets based on the indicator conditions that we do give it. Now, just one quick thing that I want to mention, and that is that this video is going to be jam-packed of information, and that is because it's actually quite difficult to put indicators in MetaTrader 5, especially compared to MetaTrader 4 or even TradingView. However, again, as I mentioned in the last videos, because of this complexity, there is added benefit that comes with trading expert advisors within MetaTrader 5. So I'm going to try to be as concise as possible, but of course give as much information out as possible, because this is a pretty hard concept, especially if you're just starting out in coding, and even if you don't come from, for example, a mathematical background, and even just trading in general if you're just starting there. So if you got any questions, again, you can of course join the Discord, leave some comments on the YouTube channel, and I'll be looking at those too. Now, another thing is that if you haven't watched my last video, then I do recommend of course watching it, because that's actually where we do start coding within MetaTrader 5. So we're going to be continuing on after that video. So do recommend that you do watch that. Now, what are we going to be doing today? Well, what I have on the screen is basically a checklist on how to put your indicators into MetaTrader 5, because it is a bit of an extensive process. I do recommend following this checklist at least when you do start coding in MetaTrader 5, so that way you can follow this and then hopefully have your indicators coded within MetaTrader 5. Now, the first thing that we're going to have to do is declare our global variables for our indicator, and then from there we're going to be setting up a handle in the OnInit function. Now, a handle is a new concept that we're going to be talking about in just a minute. And then from there, we do have to declare our indicator array variables. Now, this is where we do get into a bit more of a complex realm, and that is MetaTrader 5, because it does work on arrays, and that's where the added functionality comes in. However, there is a little bit more complexity there, and I'm going to go through a little bit of an introduction into arrays and matrices and the like in this video. Now, after we have those declared, the next thing that we have to use is the copy buffer function, which is again another new thing that we're going to be using today, and I'm going to explain that in just a moment. And then from there, we store our indicator values into a variable that we do declare, and then that's where we can then confirm whether our indicator is telling us to go long or to go short, or even if there's no trades, for example. Now, it's a little bit complicated. However, by the end of this video, hopefully you're able to follow along and then code this yourself, and then even try coding in your very own indicators in here as well. Now, handles. The reason why this is very complicated is because MetaQuotes Language 5 or MT5 does not pass the values of indicators like MetaTrader 4 or even like TradingView. Instead, it passes a handle, and then from that handle, or what that handle does is it creates a unique identifier for that particular indicator. So for example, if you're coming from MetaTrader 5, if you've used, for example, the IMA or the IMACD or whichever I indicator function that comes in or that you want to use, for example, that would give you the indicator values. Now, in MetaTrader 5, that doesn't happen. Instead, it passes a unique identifier, which then you have to use in conjunction with copy buffer to actually get the indicator values. And that's where it becomes a little bit more complicated. Now, the handle, we do declare a handle as a variable, and the variable takes a type int because it is a unique identifier. Now, before I get into copy buffer, I just want to give a brief introduction into arrays. And basically what you see on the screen is a array, which is a matrix based, which is made up from I rows and j columns. And here we see on the screen a simple example of a 3x3 matrix or array. And that is where we have 3 rows and 3 columns. One thing that I do want to note, and this is common with arrays and arrays in computer language, the first row and the first column will always start at point 0. So if we see on the screen over here, we've got row 1, column 1, but that is actually the value in here, or the lookup for this particular value, whatever that value might be, is actually 0, 0. And then row 2 is actually number 1, column number 1 0 in row 2, column 1, and then we've got 2 0 for row 3, column 1. Now, likewise, going along the columns, we've got again 0, 0, but then we've got 0, 1 and 0, 2, just to make things a little bit more complicated. However, that is how arrays are set up. We always start at the value of 0. Now, copy buffer. Copy buffer is the other new concept that we are going to be using today. And as I mentioned, the handle can be used with the copy buffer to get values of our indicators. Now, the copy buffer stores our indicator values into an array, and that array can be any size that we want it to be. However, what we're going to be commonly using, particularly if we want to do crossovers, is a 1x3 array, as we see below. So we got 1 row but 3 columns. Now this copy buffer will be declared as a variable as well. And that variable is where we're going to be storing our indicator values, and typically we would use a double to declare that variable. Now, just to quickly go through the example here of what it looks like in a actual trading scenario, we again have our copy buffer array, which is a 1x3 matrix, and we can see here that we've got some value here at position 0, 1, 2, and notice I haven't actually included the rows in here because we are only using the 1 row, and how copy buffer is set up, we only need to look up a single value, so either value 0, 1 or 2. Now, how that looks like in an actual trading example is what we see on the screen over here. Now, say for example that this candle on the right hand side is the candle that we're currently looking at because it's got the dash over here. This will be, for example, candle 0. And then we normally read right to left when we're looking at charts. So we've got candle 0, candle 1 and candle 2. Now that would be transferred into the copy buffer array, which is as followed. So similarly, it transfers like you see on the screen from right to left. Same thing with copy buffer from right to left. So we've got candle 0, candle 1 and candle 2. Now what that looks like, again, just to show you with a bit more of an example over here, is that we have that candle 1, candle 0, candle 1, candle 2, based on some wording down the bottom over here. So again, we've got the unconfirmed candle, which is candle 0. So that's a candle that is yet to be confirmed or yet to be closed. Then we got our current candle, for example, which is our current confirmed candle, which is in position number 1. And we've got our previous candle. So again, this reads from right to left, and that's one thing that you do need to remember, because how this gets confusing is although the candles read right to left, when we do want to pick up our variable or our indicator value, for example, for our previous candle, so our last candle, which is candle number 2 for this example, we need to actually tell our variable that we want position number 0. So if we want to find our previous candle value, we need to actually say that we want position number 0. If we want our current candle, we need to use position number 1. And if we want, for example, our unconfirmed candle that's still being printed, we want position number 2. Now that's where it gets a little bit confusing, but just remember that it reads right to left, like say the same thing that you would look at, for example, when you're looking at the chart, and then you would have to associate the appropriate lookup value 0, 1, 2 when you do use the copy buffer function or variable function when you are looking for example, the actual variable or value within an array. Now, for example, let's just say that our previous example, our candle has closed and now we've got a new candle that's being printed. It's not yet confirmed. Everything essentially shifts to the right. Our matrix doesn't change in size. It still remains as I shouldn't say matrix, our array still remains as a 1x3 array. And now we have this new candle X. Just for simplicity, I haven't changed the naming over here, but we've got, for example, this new candle X, and what happens is that new candle X goes into now value number 2, and then everything else gets shifted across. So then we've got candle 0 at value number 1, and then candle 1 which is this one here at value number 0. So everything gets shifted across one position, and then our new candle X gets put in here. And of course, if it was appropriate, we would change the names over here. So then it'll be technically candle 0, candle 1, and then this one would be of course candle 2. However, the same thing still remains, as that this is this candle X is still our unconfirmed candle that hasn't closed yet. This candle 0 is now our current candle that has been confirmed closed, and then our other candle over here, candle number 1, is now our previous candle and the one before. Now, these are the resources that I have used for today's video. However, one resource that I do want to recommend and you go watching is this video link by Orchard Forex, and that is using technical indicators within MQL5. I do recommend watching that. That's where I actually learned a lot when I was first starting out coding in MQL5, was Orchard trading, but this particular video, getting my head around the arrays and everything like that, just like what I showed you, I do recommend watching that too. Now, that's the end for the slides. Let's actually go start coding. All right, traders, so I've just opened up where we got up to in last week's video. So of course, this is the meta editor, and this is the code that we did last week. Now, again, if you haven't watched last week's video, then I do recommend watching that, because then at least you'll be up to speed, you'll be up to date, and you'll know exactly what we're talking about on the screen at the moment. And of course, you can follow along as part of the series. Now, there's one quick thing that I do want to update or add into this code, which I did forget to do, and that is in the OnInit function. Now, I'm actually going to remove hello world. We don't actually need that anymore, so see you later. But I'm going to add in this code. Now, basically all this is doing is saying that every time that we put on the trade, we want to give the magic number associated to that trade or associated with this expert advisor for that trade. Now, again, I mentioned this last week, but it's very important that we do use a unique identifier for this expert advisor, because if we are going to be trading multiple EAs at one time, for example, we need to make sure that there aren't going to be any conflicting signals that one EA might impose on another. So that's where the magic number comes in, and that's where we want to set that up in the OnInit function, and that's what we do there. Now, what we're going to do, compile this, save this, and now we have our completed template for our expert advisor, and we're going to build from here. Now, the first thing that we need to do, if you recall the steps, is to actually put in our indicator variables or global variables for our indicator. Now, what I want to do is get out of the code and actually just go into my terminal over here. And the very first thing is, well, what indicator are we going to be using today? Well, you can see it on the chart. We have the MACD. Now, what I'm going to actually do is remove this. And if I go to delete indicator window, I'm going to remove this and start fresh. So if you want to add in a new indicator into MetaTrader 5, assuming that you don't know how to do that, all we need to do is go to this insert tab up the top, go to indicators, and then again, we're going to be using the MACD just for this example. The MACD is hiding in the custom area, and then I can see MACD. I can't see MACD, but it's somewhere there. There it is, MACD. Now, before clicking OK, there's a few things that I want to be looking at. And under the input tabs of this window, we have 4 variables that we can choose for the particular indicator, and this indicator is MACD. Now, different indicators are going to have different variables. Some might only have 2, some might have 8. But for today, we've got 4 variables, and it's very important that we know and understand what these variables are. Now, we have fast EMA, slow EMA, signal SMA, and those have the values of 12, 26, and 9, and those are integers. And then the final thing that we do have is applied price, and that's closed price. Now, these are the 4 variables that make up the calculation of the MACD indicator. And what we're going to have to do first off is actually put these variables into our expert advisor, because our expert advisor needs to know these variables. So what I'm going to do is go back into our code. And as I mentioned, we're going to be putting these in as global variables. Now, what I'm going to do, just in the interest of time, is to copy these across. I might put in a comment here just to say MACD variables. And I'm also going to put in holder. Let me put caps there. But what I'm going to do first is just put in those variables. Now, I've created these 3 variables, and they take a value of int. And the variable names are MACD fast, MACD slow, MACD signal. And I've given the default values to these variables of 12, 26, 9, the same that we saw on the screen previously. Now, the last variable which we haven't included is that applied price, this one over here. So applied price, and we're going to be taking the close price. And that's basically how the MACD is calculated. We're calculating it based on the close price. Now, the thing is that we've already included that in the last episode over here at line 17. We've already got an input function over here, and that is input applied price, and we've got close price over here. So because we've already got that declared, we don't need to declare it again, and we're actually going to be using this for multiple indicators, of course, because the applied price, close price always stays the same. Now, the last thing that we're going to be doing is declaring our holder, as I've mentioned over here, and that's the very last thing that we're going to be doing in our global variables declaration for this particular indicator, and we're going to name it holder MACD. Now, every time that you create a new indicator or want to put a new indicator into your expert advisor, you need to give it a holder value, and so we're just going to name it holder and then MACD, and that's it. Compile, save, and now we've got this this first part of our indicator coded into our trading strategy. Now, the next thing from here is actually setting up the handle within the OnInit function. Now, what I'm going to do is go into the OnInit function. I'm going to space it out a little bit. And what I'm going to do is put in a new comment and tell it to set up handle for MACD. And we're going to be setting it up on the OnInit. Now, set. Now, there's a reason why we set up the handle in the OnInit function and not, for example, in the OnTick function. And the reason for it is once the handle is created once, it doesn't need to be created again. And the best place to do that is in the OnInit function, because as we mentioned last week, the OnInit function runs once on the initialization of the expert advisor, and then it doesn't have to run again. So that's why we're going to be doing that over here. And what we're going to do is set up our handle. I'm going to copy that across, and that is what we're going to be doing. Now, I've just declared this. I've just used the variable handle MACD, which is the same variable that we've already declared up the top as a global variable. And then I've used the iMACD function. Now, with any indicators that come by default within MetaTrader, you can use an I and then an abbreviation or whatever the MACD or whatever the indicator name is. So for example, we're using iMACD. If I go IMA, for example, that's what you want to use for IMA. Bollinger bands, I think there's something in there. So I bands or Bollinger bands, for example. So we have a few indicators at our disposal that we can use by default as for example, in our expert advisor, and we just need to call I and then what that indicator is. Now, if you've got a custom indicator, you can type in I custom. And there's a few more steps to it, which I'm not going to go into today's video, but we can use custom indicators in our expert advisor if we wanted to, and we have all the requirements in our for this function, which we can see on the screen over here. However, we're not going to be doing that. We're just going to be using iMACD for this example. Now, iMACD requires the current symbol and the current period, which is constant for all indicators for the start of their function. So it'll always take the symbol and the period. And then now we've got our indicator variables, which we have declared up here. So we've got our MACD fast, MACD slow, MACD signal, and then we've got the applied price here as well. And so basically these variables are going to be 12, 26, and 9, and then applied price over here. Jesus. Awesome. Now, one thing that I just want to do, and it's very common practice or good practice to do so, is just to print to make sure that our handle was successfully created. And I've just got this print function over here that says handle for MACD for this particular symbol. And we've got the period for this, or enum to string, which is a function that turns a enum, which is period, into a string variable, which will be able to be read using the print function. So we're using enum to string for period, and then we're just saying that it's been successfully created. Compile. Awesome. And that's it. So that's our handle done. Compile again just to be sure and be safe. Now, the one thing, although our handle is complete and it is has been initialized, we need to do the same or the opposite for the deinitialization of our particular handle. So the last thing that we need to do to complete the handle stuff is to remove the handle from MetaTrader and from the actual cache of MetaTrader. So what I've done is copy this one in, and we're going to be using the indicator release function on the handle MACD, which is of course the variable that we did initialize up over here. And we're just going to be releasing that handle, and that just removes it from the cache once the expert advisor has of course finished, and then that deinitialization runs. Again, I just want to print that the handle has been released, and we're good. Compile, perfect. And now that is the end of our handle. Now, from here, we actually get into the fun stuff, and that is to actually get our values for our indicator into our code. Now, we of course do that in the onTick function, because every time a tick runs or a new candle gets printed, for example, we want the onTick function to run, and then we want to get the indicator values every time the onTick function runs. Now, the very first thing that I want to do is actually create a new set of global variables, or one global variable, I should say, within the onTick function. And that is called string, and I've just named it indicator metrics, and then I've given it an initial value of blank. Now this is a string value, of course, and this is to find the indicator values and actually print them, for example, on the screen. And you'll see exactly why that is important at the end of the video, but we're actually going to be incorporating this indicator metrics string into our comment section. So if you recall, last week we of course added in this comment section to get some information that our expert advisor is running, so that way we can verify that our expert advisor is running the way that we think and should be running. And so of course we're going to be adding in our indicator metrics, or for example our MACD, whether our MACD is telling us to go long or short, and verifying that it's telling us to go long or short when it should be. Now, this is also a global variable, this tick release count, ticks received count, and I'm just going to put it under declare variables over here in the global variable section within the OnInit function. Now, with all that set up, let's actually start coding in our indicator. Now, the first thing we want to do is set up a bunch of variables for our indicator to get us going, which is what I've got on the screen over here. Now I'm going to run through this one by one just to make sure that you understand all of it. And the reason why I'm copying and pasting everything is because, in the interest of time, this would be a very long video if I was actually typing it all out. Now, I normally like to actually type it all out because I want to go through and error check and do all of that. However, we'd be here for the next hour and a half, unfortunately, and that's it's just crazy how hard it is to actually create indicators, but it's all for good reason. Now, the first thing that I want to do is set up a new string, and again, strings are text. Hopefully you know that by now. And then declare the variable called current symbol, and just give it the value of symbol, which all this function is doing is actually getting the current symbol that we are trading. We've used it, I think, in the last episode, or we've used it quite a bit. We've got it down there anyway. So whatever symbol that we are trading currently, that's going to get it. Now, it doesn't seem like too much at the moment. However, it's going to become very important later down the track when we do use, for example, the multi-symbol expert advisor functionality within MetaTrader 5. And you probably would have guessed it, that involves a lot more arrays. Now, we've got that declared. The next thing that I want to set up is some constant integers, and that is, for example, start candle, and I'm declaring that as 0. Required candles, and I'm declaring this as 3. The index of the MACD, and this is going to be 0. The index signal, and this is going to be 1. And then I've noticed here that I've actually set up some double variables called buffer MACD, and this is declared as an array with these square brackets next to it, and same thing with buffer, signal, and this is array. So this is going to be our variables for our array when we do actually use the copy buffer function. So these variables, these two variables are actually going to be the variables that store our MACD indicator values. Now, why is it that I've chosen to call them MACD and MACD signal? Oh, sorry, MACD and signal. Same thing with what we see on the screen over here, MACD and signal. Well, this is where we need to go back and look at the charts and look at the MACD. Awesome. So this is where we left off in our terminal. We selected the MACD indicator. We noted that we had 4 variables that we need to include in the MACD. The next thing we want to do is actually add the MACD on the chart. Now, this is the MACD. Of course, we're very familiar with this. We've got essentially 2 lines, or a histogram and a line, on MetaTrader. And the theory is with the MACD is that when we have a crossover of the MACD, we can either go long or short. For this example, we've got the MACD crossing above the red line, and the red line is that signal line. And when there is a MACD going from under the red line to over the red line, that crossover event, that's actually a bullish crossover, well, the theory says. And then similarly, if the MACD line goes below the red line, signal line, then that is a bearish crossover. Now, just to confirm that, we have on the side a data window, and this data window has our indicator window 1, and it's got 2 values in here, MACD and signal. And note that these are the 2 variables that I did declare in our code. Now remember that we've got 2 lines, the MACD line and the signal line, or the MACD histogram and the signal line. Now, which one's which? Well, we can do that by actually looking at the chart and looking at a prominent place where the MACD line is definitely above, for example, the signal line, like we see over here. And I'm just going to go to positive values because it's easier to read. I want both lines to be positive, and there we go. So we can see in the indicator 1 window that we've got the MACD line, which is taking the digits or the zeros away, 780. And then we got the signal line, which is 291. So that confirms that the MACD line is the gray line and the signal line is the red line. Now, again, all indicators are different. For example, a moving average will only have 1 value in there because it's just a moving average. We can see that on the actual chart as well. There's a red moving average over here, happens to be a 100 SMA, and we can see that there's only 1 value over here that's getting printed. Now for the MACD, we've got 2 values that are getting printed. Again, some values might have 3, 4, 5, 6, however many, depends on the indicators. However, this one just has 2, and what we need to do is actually use those two values, which is MACD and signal, and transfer them across to our code, which is exactly what we've done. Now, for every time that you do need to, I might actually bracket this just to make it a bit easier. I'll just call these I just want to set up or separate the indicator variables and buffers from, for example, the copy buffer variables, which are these ones over here. So current symbol is just a generic one. We don't actually need it, but what we do need for copy buffer is the start candle and required candles. And then we've got down over here, we've got our indicator variables, which is indicator MACD, index MACD, index signal, buffer MACD, buffer signal. Now, for every variable that you want to capture within a particular indicator, you will always need an index value, and you'll always need a copy buffer. Now, what are the index values? I've explained the buffers, but what are the index values? Now, I've got index MACD set as 0 and index signal set as 1. And it's saying here in the comments, we've got MACD line and signal line. Now, if I go back to my terminal, we've got here MACD as the first variable that shows up in the window, and then we've got the signal line that shows up as the second value in the window, and that's represented by, well, what we've got as number 1 and number 2 within our expert advisor. So it's very important to note the position that we see it on the window. 9 times out of 10 this is going to be correct, but I have had instances where for whatever reason this shows up in a particular order, but when I go into the code it's not the right order. So 9 times out of 10 it's going to be correct. However, if it's not, you might need to do some further proofing or checking within your expert advisor. So we've got MACD as the first variable or the first value in the window. And remember that within coding, everything starts at 0 and then 1. So although it was the first value, we're giving it 0. And then the second value, which was the signal line, we're actually giving it 1. So just remember, everything starts at 0 within code. And now that is our variables declared within our code. Now the next thing is to actually start to get our values across into our buffers. Now, this is where we're going to be using the copy buffer function. And what I've done here is set up a error checking scenario, which I'm going to put in the if statement as well down here. But basically what we want to be doing is creating a Boolean, and a bool is just a yes or no. And I've declared the Boolean as the name I've given this particular Boolean is fill MACD and fill signal. Again, we've got MACD and signal, MACD and signal. And I've got here the copy buffer function. So this is where we're actually starting to use copy buffer. And so what the copy buffer function requires, and what I might do is actually code this one ourselves, just so that you see the requirements within copy buffer. We see that the first requirement is we need the indicator handle. And remember that the indicator handle is what we've got over here. We set up the indicator handle in the OnInit function, and that's called handle MACD. So I'm going to go down here, handle MACD. And basically, again, what that is doing is getting that unique identifier, or just saying that this is the indicator that we're going to be using called handle MACD. And it's getting essentially the lookup for all of these variables, or for our indicator, which is MACD for these particular settings. The next thing we want to be doing, if I go back into our function, is we need the buffer number. Now, the buffer number is actually what we see on the screen over here, and that is the index number. Now, that buffer number is basically the lookup to say, hey, what do you actually want from the indicator? Because again, remember, the indicator might have multiple different values. Part of the indicator, for the MACD example, it's got 2 parts to the indicator. So we actually want to be getting, again, because we're finding the MACD line, we want to be getting the actual MACD line over there. And remember, the actual MACD value is not the indicator. The MACD is the actual MACD value, because again, the MACD takes a MACD line and a signal line. Now, the next thing we want to be doing is getting the start position. Now, just to make it simple, I've got this variable here, which is 0, and that's called start position. And the reason why we want to be using 0, just to make it easier, is again, we're starting to populate our copy buffer at position 0, or at that current candle that's yet to be confirmed, if we do recall back to the PowerPoint slides that I was showing before. So we're always going to be starting at 0. Now, to save on cache or memory, we can actually start from candle 1 because we don't actually need candle 0. However, just for simplicity, I'm just going to be using candle 0 for today. Now, the next thing that we want to be doing, and I just noticed that I've used candle 0 down here. I might actually put in there. I might space that across. Awesome. So the next thing that we want in, if we look at our copy buffer, is the count. Now, the count is basically saying how big do we want the array. So we want the array, as we mentioned, as a 1x3 size array, or it has 3 positions, and that's so that we can capture the previous candle, the current candle that's confirmed, and then the candle that is yet to be confirmed. We want to be capturing those three values. So we would have 3 in here, or we can put in the variable that we've got 3. The variable required candles, which essentially returns 3 anyway, but we want to make it a size 3 array. Now the last thing is we want to actually define, or where do we want to put in these values. Now what copy buffer is doing is essentially taking the MACD indicator, finding what MACD value we want. So for this example, it's the MACD line. Which candle are we looking for? So that's candle number 0. And how big do we want the array? And that is by size 3. So basically it's taking the MACD line and it's getting candle 0, candle 1, and candle 2. Again, reading right to left. And then it's going to be populating that into an array. So that array is what we've declared over here, which is buffer MACD. And I've just copied that over here. And again, semicolon to finish that off. Let's compile. I've got 2 warnings here. What have I done wrong? Oh, I don't need the array or the square brackets in there. There we go. So remember, because although we're declaring this as an array over here, we just need to actually get the name of that particular array, which is buffer MACD. So that was that error, and that's why I like actually doing the typing live. I'm not going to go into the signal one, but what I will mention is it's good to have this error check over here, just because if you think about it, if you are starting your expert advisor at the very beginning of your backtest, you won't actually have any information of, for example, past data. So if I were to start my backtest from the 1st of the 1st, 2020, I would not actually have any data or any information within my expert advisor on the candle that was the 31st of December, 2019. And the reason being is because we've just initialized our expert advisor. It's not going to look back on anything in the past because the onTick function hasn't run for that candle that was the 31st of the 12th, 2019. So saying that, what will happen is when the first onTick function runs, we would only have a value for example, our MACD line for 1 candle and not all 3 candles. So because of that, we actually want to pass this error check, or use this error check to say if our MACD, or if this value, which is this Boolean, which is true or false, but if our MACD indicator, or our value MACD from our MACD indicator, is not properly filled out, so there's not 3 values within our array. Again, we're getting 3 values. If it's not, then we want to return or end the onTick function, and we don't want to proceed anymore because, for example, if you don't have this in here, we might get errors within our code, and when our expert advisor first initializes, it might, for example, take a trade when we actually really don't want it, or because our arrays aren't properly filled out. So that's just a good way to error check there. Now, that's awesome. That's good. Basically, what we have now is 2 buffers, or 2 arrays, essentially. One called MACD or buffer MACD, and then the other called MACD or buffer signal. And these 2 arrays, again, are holding 3 values in an array. The value being the MACD on the previous candle, the MACD on the current candle, and the MACD on the candle that's yet to be closed. Likewise, we've got the signal value on the previous candle, the signal value on the current candle, and now the signal value on the on the current candle that's yet to be confirmed. We've got that in these copy buffer arrays. Now, what we're going to do, again, I'm just going to copy over code. Again, I hope you see how complex this actually can get, but hopefully you're following along. Again, you might actually have to watch this a few times. Like, for example, I've watched Orchard Trading's video like 10, 20 times just to get my head around this. So the next thing that I've done is copied over this code. And what I've done is declared some new variables called current MACD, current signal, prior MACD, and prior signal. And basically what I'm doing is getting the value of MACD of the buffer MACD, which again is this over here, and getting position number 1. And what this normalized double function does is just gets that value and just rounds it to what we have is 10 decimal places. Now, most traders, for example, would be using pips or pipettes, which is up to 5, which is rounding up to 5 just to save on memory and stuff as well. However, what I've noticed in my back testing is there is prone to errors when you are doing rounding. So I would like to keep this as big as I possibly can. So I've actually pushed it all the way out to 10. Now you can choose to do 5, you can choose to do 8, for example. I've just gone with 10 just to make sure it's safe and it works. And that's what I found worked best for myself. Now I've done this 4 times. Current MACD, current signal, prior MACD, and prior signal, because again, this is where we want to actually get these 4 values and actually work out whether there was a crossover event that has occurred. Now, just recall again these positions. So again, we've got the prior signal line is position number 0. The current signal line is position number 1. So again, remember that, and I think I've got it on the screen over here. We've got here prior, current, confirmed, and not yet confirmed. And that is what our array is picking up. And that really can go here. Oh, as a comment. That really can go over here. Because just remember that our buffer is always going to be set up like this. So prior, current, and not confirmed. Again, same thing how you're reading from a chart. You're reading right to left. However, your position is going to be 0, 1, 2. And that's how it's set up like this. And basically, that's what your array will look like. But of course, just with numbers and stuff within here based on what you are looking up. And that is, for example, the MACD line. So there we have it. We actually now have variables for our indicator so that we can actually calculate current and signal. And notice how I haven't used or haven't declared any variables for example, on candle or position number 2 or our candle that's not yet confirmed. And that is because we don't actually need that to confirm whether there's a crossover or not. So really we can save on memory and reduce this to a 1 by 2 array. However, that means we would have to do some changes over here. If you do want to do that, all you'll need to do is start from position number 1 and reduce your candle by 2. However, I won't go into that, but the option's there if you are wanting to explore that. I won't go into the details as to why. So now we can actually put in our long and short conditions, which is awesome because we've got this all set up. Now, what we want to do, unfortunately, if you've come from TradingView, we've used the crossover function and cross under function. We don't have that in MetaTrader, so we actually have to do that manually. And what I'm going to do is actually type this out. Now, what we want to do, particularly for a long, for example, we want to find, or let's just go into the charts. We want to find when we want to go long, and this is an example of a typical long for our MACD. So what's happened in the past is the MACD line was less than the red line, which is the signal line. So let's code that into our code. So prior MACD, so the prior MACD is less than, and I like to put in equals as well, the signal line. Now, from there, we want to put and the way we do and is with the 2 ands over here. Go back, and the next condition is the MACD line is now greater than the signal line. So that's the next condition, and that's how we would code a crossover. So I'll get the current MACD now is greater than the current signal. There we go. So we've got an if statement. So if the prior MACD is less than the prior signal, and we've got the current MACD is now greater than the current signal, that means that a crossover event has happened. And that's, for example, when we want to go long. So what I'm going to do is put in a new variable. Apologies, I should have put this right at the start. And this variable is called string open signal MACD. Now I've created this new string, and I'm going to put in a comment over here that just says that this is a strategy trigger, and this is the MACD. Again, there's differences between triggers and filters, but triggers are going to be your main entry, and typically triggers will require a crossover event or something where two indicator or two lines cross, or price crosses above an indicator, for example, a moving average, but this would be a trigger event. And so I've declared a new string which is called open string MACD. Sorry, open signal MACD, and basically this is just going to say whether we want to be entering a trade or not, and it's going to return a string value, and that string value is going to be whether it's going to be long or short bias. So I'm going to take this string value and come down here, and in this if statement, now with if statements, we haven't actually spoken about them, but with if statements will require something like this. If, actually that should be over here. If open MACD signal, so if we do get a crossover event, we want our open signal MACD to equal long, for example. And that's how we do an if statement within MetaTrader 5. Let's compile this and see if we got, oh, awesome, no errors, that's good. Now we want the opposite true, so I can do else if, and I can type in, for example, the same thing actually, but opposite conditions, because of course short is going to be the opposite. So all I need to do is just to change the arrows. So then we've got the opposite. So we've got else if the prior MACD is greater than or less than the prior signal, and the current MACD is greater than, is less than the current signal, then we go short. Now just to confirm that, we've got this example over here on the screen. We've got the prior MACD is greater than the prior signal, which we've got here. Prior MACD is greater than or equal to prior signal. And then we've got the current MACD, which is after the crossover has occurred. The current MACD is now less than the current signal. And we've got less than the current signal. Awesome. Now we can put in again. So if that happens, we want open signals be short. Else we want no trade. Well, something like that. Else we want to return the string value of open MACD signal, no trade. Awesome. Now let's compile this. Great. Now a good cheat when you're doing if statements is, or a good shortcut is, if you are only doing one value within your if statement, you can actually reduce on lines. You don't need this the curly brackets over here. You can just do this just to save on space if you only got one line, because MetaTrader will automatically read that this if statement or this value relates to this if statement, and you don't need the curly brackets. So just to keep things a bit neater, I can do, for example, something like this. Compile. And that works. Now, again, you should be coming from MetaTrader or TradingView, and we have used if statements in the past over there. So again, this should not be of any issue to you in regards to these if statements. Now, this works. Well, hopefully it works. But we need to find a way to actually make sure that it actually works, because although we're getting, for example, this string now that's saying open MACD signal long or open MACD signal short, we actually have no way of actually knowing whether this is returning the right values. And that's where, of course, this comment function comes in. And what I need to do actually is put backspace that, just one, or tab that one. But what we want to do is actually put in our open signal MACD within our comment section over here. Now, if you recall, I mentioned that we have created this new variable called indicator metrics. So all we need to do is actually use that for our particular code. And then we've got here indicator metrics. Now, what I want to do is actually use what's called string concatenate. And I might actually comment this. So we want to be using this variable. And what I'm saying here is we want to concatenate the indicator variables to output the comment for the user. And that comment is going to be put into the indicator metrics variable that we did declare. Now, again, what we're going to do is go string concatenate brackets. And what the string concatenate function does is it grabs the previous or a variable and it just concatenates that. So the first concatenate that we want to do, or where we want to be putting it to, is called indicator metrics. And then we want to take what was in indicator metrics in the past, which is just typing it in again, indicator metrics. And then we want to put in some new concatenate variables. And again, what concatenate is it just adds string values together. So what we want to do is put in something like this, MACD bias, so our indicator bias, and put a space there, and then concatenate again, and then put in our open MACD signal. And basically what this is going to do is actually say on the chart or in the comment MACD bias, and then it's going to tell us whether our MACD bias is long, short, or has no trade. And then that's all we need actually for that. And then that's it. Let me compile that. That's good. Perfect. So now that we've got this string concatenate within our code, the last thing that we need to do, we've got the string concatenate for our indicator metrics. All we need to do is actually add our indicator metrics to our comment section over here. And a good place to do that is under symbols being traded. We'll just add in indicator metrics. Cool. Now let's compile that. And that has successfully compiled. So, compile again, I just tabbed. All right, so now I'm back in the terminal, and what we're going to be doing is to actually test our expert advisor. Now I've got our expert advisor loaded up over here, and the one thing that I want to mention quickly is in the modeling, I want to make sure that we are using open prices only, and we're not using, for example, 1 minute open, high, low, close, or tick data. Now there's a good reason for that, which I'm going to go through in just a minute. However, just make sure for this demo purpose that we are using open price only. So what we're going to do is click start, and our expert advisor will run in demo mode. And just notice quickly that I've got this blue handle all the way pushed to the end. And that's because I want to just pause this and then go through this manually just for testing purposes. So if you haven't done that and your expert advisor has rushed through this, then put that down to the end. And what I'll do is close that, and I'll just start again just for the demo. Awesome. So there's a few things that I want to run through. The first thing is the comment section over here. We've got here symbols traded, Australian US dollar, and we've got MACD bias, no trade. And that's that comment or that indicator metrics that we put in. And we've added that into our comment section over here. And we've got MACD bias and no trade. And that, of course, is represented by the MACD that we do have over here. Let me move my face across. Awesome. So we can see the MACD line over here, and we've definitely got no trade because there was no crossover event that's happened before. Again, our buffer actually hasn't completed. And the other thing that I just want to show is, I'm going to have to move my face again, but is this down here. We've got here a print function that has printed out handle for MACD, Australian dollar, period, 1 hour has been successfully created. And that's that print function that we did create at the on initialization of the expert advisor. And that, of course, let's just move across. But that, of course, is what we needed to see because our handle, of course, is successfully created. So that's good to see. Now, it might move me across again. But what we want to see, or what we want to test, is our expert advisor. And again, we've got ticks received as 2. So we saw that the chart actually moved across 1. But we want to actually now test our expert advisor and test our indicator to see when a crossover actually happens. And we can see one happening over here by the looks of it. We can see we've got a bit of a divergence plate, and the red line is coming across and very close to the MACD histogram. Let's go one more. And there we go, we've got a crossover event. Now, what's important to note here, I'll just pause it so we don't get shot across again. But what's important to note is, and if you came from my trading view tutorial, although there's a crossover that has occurred here, remember that this has not confirmed at this stage. It only confirms once the new candle is open. So if we were trading this live, this has not yet confirmed close, even though it has technically closed. The next candle has not opened. And again, we are not going to be entering trades until the opening of the next candle. So that's why this says no trade at this stage. Now, the other reason why, of course, is that this is technically candle 0. Again, a non-confirmed candle. And then we've got candle 1 and then candle 2 over here. And again, we've got, remember that we are using a 3 or 1x3 size array, and that array captures the previous candle, which is this one, the current candle, which is this one, and then the candle that is not yet confirmed, which is this one here. However, we are taking the crossover or calculating the crossover based off these two candles over here. And based on those two candles, the crossover has not occurred on these two candles. It's actually occurred on the unconfirmed candle. And then it's, of course, confirmed on that current confirmed candle. So basically, all I meant to say is that we're not going to get a trade until the candle is closed. And then we go to the next candle. Like that. So I've just skipped across one candle, and now we can see we've got a crossover event that's happened over here. And this is where we actually would have entered the trade, and we would have entered the trade on this candle, and we would have entered on the candle open, give or take a little bit of spread. So that actually is working perfectly. So when the crossover has happened, we've got a short signal, and that was of course a bearish crossover. Let's see if we can find, looks like we're going to get into another one already. And notice how it's gone to no trade, because we are using this as a trigger. So when there is no crossover, there is no trade. Even though there's, for example, the MACD is above the red line, that's, I guess, bullish bias. It's only going to tell us whether we are going long or short when a crossover event happens, because again, it's a trigger. So let's go to the next one. No crossover, no crossover. We're still short. Definitely looks like we're going to get a cross here. There we go. So again, we have crossed over here, but we haven't confirmed yet because we need to wait for the next candle to enter the trade. And there we go. We've gotten long. So we got a long signal, and that long signal, we would have gotten long, of course, on the open of this particular candle over here. And then I'll just go to the next one, and then notice how the long signal has gone away. So we would have entered, of course, a trade. We might have other conditions and the like within the system, but we would have entered the trade over here. Now, again, we don't have any other code within our trading strategy to actually enter the actual trade for us with, of course, appropriate position sizing, money management, and we might actually have other filters within the trading strategy, for example, other indicators or even spread filters, even session filters, for example. So we do have to consider all of that. However, just for a start, we've got an indicator within the system, and it looks like to be working. Now, that's working well and good. Every time we do run this on the on the candles open and closes only, we do notice that we have ticks received as 20. And so every time a new candle is opening, we've got a new tick, or the OnInit function does run. And of course that creates a new tick. And then when that happens, we do see a crossover of the particular candles. Now, what's important to note in the modeling methodology is we used open prices only. However, in a real life scenario, we're going to be using ticks, because every time a tick gets received, of course, the on tick function runs. Now, I'm going to just use 1 minute open, high, low, close to demonstrate this. But let's go and play this. Now, every time a tick is received, and for this example, it's just a 1 minute open, high, low, close tick, we are receiving a new tick, and that means the onTick function runs each time in our code. Now that means that every time the onTick function runs, our buffer actually repopulates. So we're not actually now repopulating our indicator based off candles, because our indicator is never actually based off candles. It's based on what is fed into the system, and that is the ticks. And so every time this actually runs 18, 19, 20, what is happening is now the candle, we're not populating the buffer. Let's show in the PowerPoint. We're actually not populating this at all. We're not populating candle 0, candle 1, or candle 2. We're actually populating tick 1, or tick 0, tick 1, and tick 2, which means that this is now incorrect over here. Our previous candle and our current candle and our unconfirmed candle is actually not being calculated properly. And this is very important to understand, because every time the onTick function runs, it's not actually based off the candle closing, it's based off the ticks being received. So that's where we actually need to go into our code and actually put in a filtering system to make sure that we are only trading or only receiving ticks based on the open or the close of a candle, for example. So that's a very important thing to actually understand, because for example, if we were to run our expert advisor straight away based off this, our expert advisor would actually run like this and not run based on candle closes, but based on, of course, ticks. And so when we do get a crossover event, I've gone way too fast. But when we do get a crossover event, hopefully I can capture one. Oh man. There we go. We would have had something there, because when the tick, when this actually just pops over a little bit, it's actually going to enter a trade. And I think there we go. We saw it pop over over there. So anytime this indicator or this metric runs, and it doesn't have to be on the confirmation of a candle, it can be on the tick, which we have seen. It can just enter a trade like that, and that's how exactly it's going to run. Because if we do actually trade this, we're going to be trading it based on ticks, and it's not going to wait for candle confirmation. So that's where we need to make sure that we are coding correctly, and we do understand and go back to the charts and test all of this out and actually understand what exactly our expert advisor is doing. So that is what we're going to be doing in the next video, and that is going to be using a time filter to make sure that we are trading candle opens only. Maybe you want to trade, for example, ticks, you can of course do that. However, we want to be, for this example, we want to be trading candle opens only. So what I want to do quickly, and this is going to be a long video, and it's going to be in 4K, jeez. But what I'm going to be doing is actually, and the last thing I want to do, just to neaten things up a little bit, is actually put this as a function or a custom function. Now this is something that's new, but this is something that will definitely tidy up everything and just clean up your code a little bit more. So what I want to do is create a custom function for our MACD, because we are going to be creating custom functions for all of our indicators. Custom functions, and of course other things that we're going to be using as well. So the main bulk of an indicator is made up of what we see on the screen at the moment. Let me move my head. But what we see on the screen at the moment, and that is again declaring your indicator variables using the copied buffer function, and then getting from our buffer the actual variables of our indicator, and then putting in the condition over here, and then just using the comment function to comment that out to the user. Now, what we want to do is move that across to our custom function. And actually what I want to do, sorry, move this. I'm going to keep the string concatenate in here, but what I want to do is move this across so that way we have a function, for example, a custom function that will say, for example, every time we want to run this custom function, it runs this section of code, and then it'll spit out whether we go long, short, or have no trade. Essentially, that's all we want to do. That's all we want to see. And it's good to put this as a custom function because we don't want to see it in our main part of the code. All we want to know is whether we're going long, short, or no trade. So I've just cut that out, and I'm just going to go, I've just added in this text over here that just says custom function, and I'm just going to put in our code over here like that. Now, what I want to call this custom function, or what I want to do is actually just put a comment in here and call it custom function for MACD, or to get MACD, signals. Now, what I'm going to do is create this custom function, and I'm going to give it a declaration of a string, and I'm going to call it get MACD open, signal, and then I'm just going to give it these curly brackets, and then within the custom function, all I'm going to have to do is put in, these were normal brackets, but what I'm going to have to put in is curly brackets, and notice how it's like this. I'm just going to cut this one and put it at the bottom down here. So now that we've got, basically we've got a string. So this is just going to, what that means is when we call this custom function, it's going to return a string, and that string of course is going to be long, short, or no trade. And when this custom function gets called, everything over here runs. Now, I've got these two brackets over here. Now, if we wanted to put in any values into this custom function, so for example, if we needed some indicator values or the like that weren't declared as global variables, we'd have to put them in here. However, all of our indicator variables are already declared, or a handle, I should say, with our indicator variables are already declared as global functions. So our function, even being a custom function all the way down the bottom, will be able to read, for example, our handle, because it is a global variable. So we actually don't need to pass any variables into this, but in future videos we'll see custom functions that do require variables. All right, so now that we've got our custom function made, all we need to do is actually go back to the top over here and actually put our custom function back to where it was before. So essentially we're just replacing all the text that was in here with this single line of code, and when that single line of code runs, it's going to then go over to our custom functions section over here and actually get that within here. Now, what we need to do is actually put this custom function, or get this, or put a variable to this custom function, and we've actually got a variable over here which is called open signal MACD. So instead of just having open signal MACD as a string declaration, we can actually put equals and then get MACD value, because what you notice over here is what we're doing down here is we've got open MACD signal down here equals long. So that's what we were doing before, is we were running this code and we were saying to put in open MACD or change open MACD to long if of course long conditions were true, likewise short, and likewise for no trade. So that's essentially what we're doing over here. We're going open MACD signal, and then we're calling the function over here. Now, what we want to do, if I compile this, we're going to get errors. We got a bunch of errors. And the reason being is when a custom function is run, we don't actually use the operator over here as open signal MACD. We want to actually use return. Oops. We want to be actually using return instead. So all this is saying is when the function is run, we actually want to return long, for example, and then once that returns long, we will then up the top here, we've got open signal MACD will then equal what is being returned, and that would be, for example, long. Now, if I compile this, there will be one error, and that is over here. And that is this return function over here. Now, because this return function was previously there because we wanted to close the on tick function. Now that's not going to be the case at the moment because this is now outside the onTick function. So what we want to do is, instead of doing just the return, we want to return again a string, similarly to how we're returning a string here. And I'm just going to return, for example, what am I going to say? Buffer not full. So just that, compile. Oh, what's happening now? I might need a tab if. Why don't you like me? This is a bit awkward. I love this. Oh, I don't need. Oh, that's why. I don't need. I don't need equals. Awesome. There we go. So when you do the return function, there you have it. You don't need the equals. So if you do get that error yourself, there you go. You don't need the equals. Now, my mistake. Now let's compile this and just double check to make sure it's running correctly. So what we're going to be doing is going back over here. Let's run handle opens only. Let's start. Ah, not this again. Let me go out. Let me start again. Now this will, there we go, work. There we go. So we confirmed the crossover. We would have entered in on this candle at the candle open. We would have entered in short. Let's do another long example. There's a long, so we've crossed over. We haven't confirmed yet. Crossed over long, we've got long bias. So everything works. Again, I would recommend doing not just 2 examples, but actually going through this and doing many examples, making sure that it's working properly. Just in case you might have, for example, maybe missed something or made a mistake, or there might be an error in your code. There could be an error in my code. Don't take my word for it. Do it yourself. That's the whole reason for this. But there we have it. Now we've got our indicator in our code. And what I'm going to do is just do a quick cleanup. Concatenate values. I want to just put that comment over here. Awesome. So now every time that we actually need to, for example, use the MACD signals, all you need to do is copy over these 2 variables and of course call the MACD function down over here. Now you can copy this across to any of your codes. Now this is essentially, this can be used anywhere. All you need to do is you're going to have to copy this and then copy this. Of course, you need to get the function, and then just remember to put in your handles and your variables. But all you need to do is copy this, and of course put them in the right place. Again, release your handle as well, so do your handling stuff. But now that you've coded it, all you need to do is copy this part as well in the onTick function. And then you've got, of course, this big chunk of code that you can copy across to any other trading strategies that you might be using. So that is exactly what you'll need to use, especially if you're just using this template. I do recommend just keeping the same template so that everything will talk to each other. So that way you can still, again, use the same comment function, and you're just changing indicators around. So for example, if you're not using the MACD, you might be using another indicator. You can just replace the MACD with something else, granted that you've, of course, coded it properly. But there you have it. So that is it, my friends. I hope I haven't lost too many people, because this is going to be a very long episode. I actually do not look forward to editing and cutting out some minor bits and pieces here and there. However, it is what it is. And there is a lot that we do have to, of course, go through when it comes to coding within MetaTrader 5. And the reason why I wanted to be so in-depth and to go through all of this and provide the PowerPoints is because I found this very difficult when I was first starting off, particularly as well, coming from a mathematical background, again, being an engineer. I found this a little bit hard to wrap my head around. So I'm assuming that a lot of people are going to find this hard as well. So I wanted to be as in-depth and thorough as possible and go through all the requirements needed to, of course, put in an indicator into MetaTrader, and of course do it step by step along the way so that you can follow along, and do a couple of other things here and there, like for example using the string concatenate to actually comment what's happening for our expert advisor, because this is exactly how you want to be developing an expert advisor or trading robot. You need to make sure it's operating properly, and these are the steps to do it. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Apologies that it's going to be coming out a day later than usual, and the reason being is because I had to prepare a little bit more than first anticipated. However, saying that, it's all for good reason. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, hopefully you learned something, and hopefully you can get your expert advisor and your MACD, and maybe if you can do that, try other indicators. But use this to do your own indicators, follow along, and follow those steps that I did provide. So happy trading, happy coding, enjoy the rest of your day. If you haven't already subscribed, like the video, leave a comment, and say hello. So enjoy the rest of your day, happy coding, happy trading, and I'll see you in the next one.